of the ominous potential of the military-industrial complex, and then we're going to go ahead and take a break.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States. Good evening, my fellow Americans. We now stand 10 years past the midpoint of a century that has witnessed 4 major wars among great nations. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development. Yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizen can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
And that video is available at our website, therealnewsradio.com, under must-see videos. We're going to go to a break, and we're going to come back with our guest from Iraq Veterans Against the War.org. Hello, we're back on The Real News. We're joined today with Rebecca Moore, a member of the Iraq Veterans Against the War. Their website's ivaw.org. Ms. Moore, it's an honor to have you on The Real News with us today. Are you doing okay today?
I'm pretty good, Sharon. Thank you very much. How are you today?
Doing good. To begin with, Ms. Moore, we at The Real News, we totally agree with your position that this war was wrong. But for our listeners, tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience in Iraq.
Hi. Well, I'm 30 years old, and at the time I was an Army reservist. I was 26, a single mom of 2 children. I was sent to a unit from Hawaii to Savannah, Georgia, and I ended up being deployed 18 days later to Tikrit, Iraq. My original job was as a cook, but due to the job that I got stuck with, which was basically in a medic back battalion, I ended up doing the job of a medic. And I've come to understand the war in a completely different way because I was seeing things that the news was not showing. I was seeing dehumanization of the Iraqi people. I was seeing dehumanization of the troops in general. And these are things that aren't spoken about, in the mainstream media.
Well, do you feel as we do that we were misled by the Bush administration into the war with Iraq?
Absolutely, I do. And most of the IVAW members will say the same thing, that had we known the truth about why George Bush wanted to go into Iraq, then we probably would have become conscientious objectors. I was convinced that this was the right thing to do, and that Saddam Hussein had something to do with September 11th, and that if we didn't take care of him in this situation, that there would be a World War III, and that he was headed down the same path as Hitler, and it was terrifying. But coming back and now realizing, waking up and seeing the truth, I realized how misled I actually was. It's kind of painful.
Good morning, Miss Moore. This is Brian.
Good morning, Brian.
Good morning. I would just like to touch on something you had just said, and of course we always touch here on the Real News, and that is the fact mainstream media absolutely in no way whatsoever represents what reality is, and really any subject, particularly of course the war in Iraq. I was wondering if you could go into some of the details, things maybe possibly you've seen or heard of, things you've seen, like of course we hear of all the atrocities Blackwater, all the private corporate mercenary armies are committing in Iraq.
Right. Were you asking for my experience with the private corporations and things like that?
Yes, just any insight you have to things that we normally, of course, would never see on mainstream media.
I think the biggest thing would be the fact that most of what has been labeled insurgents and terrorists are average, misinformed Iraqi people. You know, the average guy and his son who don't understand what's going on, and they end up acquiring weapons of some sort from someone, and then they end up in a midnight raid and are taken away from their family because they're looked at as being terrorists. Which you don't see that side of it here, because you only see, well, so-and-so was arrested for terrorism. But you don't hear the after story of, oh, we had to let him go because we found out that he wasn't a terrorist, that he had nothing to do with Al-Qaeda, blah, blah, blah. So you're only seeing one side of it here. Whereas there, you're seeing the aftermath of the whole thing. You're seeing the families that are torn apart, the people who are dead, just the atrocities like that you just don't hear about here.
The civilian deaths in Iraq, there's been a lot of different numbers that's been reported. The BBC has reported 660,000 civilian deaths, women, children, non-military. Some of the press in the United States has reported over 1 million innocent civilian deaths, and we've stated here on the Real News that if Saddam Hussein had lived 10 lifetimes, he probably wouldn't have killed more of his own people than we have. Do you see our occupation as fueling hatred in the region?
You know, I'm kind of torn on that subject. I don't think that the average Iraqi person hates the American soldiers unless they've experienced something directly from the American soldier. I think most of them now understand that we were there because we were told a lie. You know, now they're educating themselves and they have enough strength to know that, you know, we were just doing our jobs. But a lot of what you see, the hate that you see, is not from the Iraqi people, but from people crossing over from the other countries into Iraq. I guess you could call them insurgents or whatever you want to call them. But I never personally experienced anything aside from, you know, like the roadside bombs, and you never really know who places those. But never a face-to-face confrontation with an Iraqi person. I was never disrespected by an Iraqi person, and I worked hand in hand with him for quite a few months.
Having been a member of the military, what is your view of these multiple deployments, being forced to stay in the military beyond their enlistment agreements?
Yeah, I have it. You're talking about stop loss, I think.
Yes.
I have an issue with stop loss because that's not something that's stated in the contract when you sign a contract to go into the military. But I learned very quickly that they can kind of morph the contract any way they want to. I don't believe that it's right. I think that it's basically forced slavery. Even though you're getting a paycheck, you're still forced into being there when you shouldn't have to be there. I think it's contributing to the decrease of the mental health of all of our troops and their families, and it's contributing to the decrease of the stabilities of our society in general.
I know you mentioned that a lot of people were under the assumption that we went into Iraq because of 9/11. And of course, we all know now that Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. This would just be your opinion. Do you think we're in Iraq and in that region because of the oil?
You know, it's more than oil. It's got to do with privately funded corporations and things like that. You know, the corporations make so much money out of this war that it's a sickening